Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Riverdale. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, this was actually kind of an interesting episode, kind of like everyone's issues kind of coming to light. It's just like a lot of stuff people are burying to a certain extent. Not everyone's issues kind of come to light, but it is a thing of people kind of confronting a lot of stuff because basically, like, we get that opening with Kevin and Fang, well, in particular with Kevin, where it's like, oh, he's doing that, like, random hookup thing again that he was doing back in the day, because even, like, Jughead was saying that thing at the beginning, like, even after all these years, certain things kind of sadly kind of stayed the same, and obviously he's hiding it from Fang, or maybe he's hiding, because maybe even Toni and them don't know, so maybe he hid that fact, like, because it seemed like Fang was kind of okay, like, later on when it kind of comes out, it seems like Fang was okay with it. So I don't know. It might have just been like for appearances with Toni. But he was just kind of like, oh, I went to go get some cereal and all that. So that's all there was to it. But Fang and Kevin make the announcement like, hey, we're getting married. We're having a baby. In fact, we're having Toni's baby, which Cheryl immediately was like, what the hell is going on here? And obviously she takes offense. And I thought what's really interesting when we got her perspective on things, for her, it's like, Toni, like, brought her from, it's like, oh, I've been kind of staying in Thornhill, like, I've just kind of stayed essentially inside my castle the entire time. You brought me back down to the real world, and now it's like, oh, you've been doing the entire time is flaunting your happiness, essentially is how she took it, which I can understand that perspective on things. It's like, you're, not only are you having a baby, not with me, it's like, because it's jealousy, because it's like, whereas basically Cheryl's life has been on pause basically the past 7 years, Toni's moved on, like, she's having a baby with Kevin and Fang, and, like, they're having their own little family, and it's like, for her, it's like, that's not fair. It's like, because it's almost like Cheryl felt like maybe there was something between her and Toni, I think, after Toni kind of pulled her back, but it's like, so, like, Toni's like, oh, I also wanted to pull you back from, like, the Vixens, just the way it's almost like, where it's almost complicated, because, like, I've talked about this before, like, whereas Toni was very, like, accepting of Cheryl with all her flaws and everything, like, she was very ride or die. She was like always there for Cheryl. It just seems like anything that she might have been okay with before with Cheryl, I guess it's like, I'm older now, like, I have two, because she ends up talking about the fact that she's having a baby now, because if she has one, she has a condition where it's like, basically, if the longer she waits, the less and less likely. So it's like, I need to have children, the younger, if I want to make sure I'm able to have any at all, So it's that, it's a complicated thing of, like, I think because of that, she might not put up with as much of Cheryl's antics as she used to. But Cheryl's very complicated, and just like, she can come off very mean-spirited and stuff like that, because it's like, for her, I think, considering the family she grew up in, it was almost like that's the only way, like, you show someone love, Like I said, they've always been a rock-solid team, but I think it's just with everything shifting in their lives, like I said, sadly, Toni's kind of moving on, like, her life's moving forward, whereas Cheryl's kind of, her life's been on pause the past 7 years, so. And obviously she's talking to Minerva about it, which Minerva's like, yeah, like, just paint this painting of me, but also, like, I haven't decided what I'm going to do afterwards. I'm like, oh, okay. I thought you were going to set her up to do more illicit stuff, like, oh, like, do some forgeries for you. Still a possibility later on down the road, but Minerva's like, oh, why don't you kind of, it's either you be happy for them or throw a little chaos in. It's like, well, that's what Cheryl does best. She loves throwing a wrench into things. Obviously, like, Betty and Archie, they've kind of been continuing their thing, but for Betty, she doesn't want what they have to get serious, because for her, it's like, if it becomes serious, like, she's scared that, like, Archie's a light in the darkness, and the last thing she wants to do is snuff out that light with everything going on. So that's why she's like, if we get too close, like, all the darkness in my life is going to envelop him. Because obviously we see she's having nightmares about TBK, which, she wakes up and calls Archie, and Archie was like, oh, he thought it was just a booty call. But for her, it's like, she just wanted to forget the nightmare and everything. So for him, it was a situation where it's like Betty's still not opening up about everything she's going with and dealing with. And obviously Archie's talking to Jackson about it. And it's like, oh, look at you, Sarge, two different women. Because it's like, obviously there's things between him and Veronica. Like, things are like, there's feelings there that haven't gone away and are still kind of resurfacing after all these years. And we can see that kind of applies to Veronica as well. Like, some stuff has kind of hinted to that. And I thought, but for Archie, he feels bad because he's like, I'm not the type to try like two-time people like that. It's like, it's not fair for me to kind of like be doing the things I'm doing with Betty, but also feel the way I do about Veronica because she's also married too. So that just complicates things. Jughead's dealing with stuff. That professional him and Tabitha were talking to last episode. She shows up and it's like, well, after what Jughead experienced, it's like, well, is this just your body or mind trying to block out something traumatic? Like, is this, or did you really have a close encounter? And initially, she's kind of not, initially Jughead's like, I don't need to talk to anybody. Whatever's repressed, I want it to stay that way. But he ends up talking to Tabitha later on about it, and I thought it was interesting. Like, for him, it's like, he was opening it up a little bit in the group, but the moment, like, it kind of hit him, and he was just like, no. He talked about the fact that he was kind of in a dark spot, like drugs, like jingle jangle, and like he just blacked out in like New York. And the way it sounded at first, because the way, I don't know whether it was like the one time or whether it was like the way Jughead was talking about it before, it seemed like it was just a one-time thing. But for him, it's like there was a lot of time he lost and he has no idea what he was up to or what he did. And Tabitha, which I thought was interesting, Tabitha was like, we don't have to go to Cheryl's party, which we'll get to that soon enough, but it was like, you don't have to go to Cheryl's party, we could just go to a movie or hang out. And I was like, oh. But Jughead was like, no, let's just, like, some debauchery and stuff like that, fine. Just kind of get my mind off of things. But it was almost like Tabitha was kind of disappointed. I was like, oh, like it seemed like they're hinting towards that. So that was kind of interesting. But, the real point of things is obviously Cheryl, like I said, it's like, oh, our youthful, we're going into adulthood. It's like, we're heading into our 30s, then mortality, and then basically it's the end. It's like, I mean, once again, that's the young person's perspective of like, oh my God, I'm going into our 30s. Disgusting. We have to leave our hot, sexy 20s behind. I say that as a 28-year-old, which I love that some people, but I think it becomes that perspective more and more as you get older. Just like, oh my God, my 30s were so awesome. Now I'm hitting my 40s. Oh, my 40s were awesome. Now I'm hitting my 50s. So on and so forth, But nevertheless, it's a key party. It's like everyone brings their keys and whatever ends up happening happens, So everyone ends up showing up, and I thought it led to some really interesting stuff. First and foremost, it didn't blow up in people's faces. Like, I was actually shocked. I was like, wow, this wasn't the blow up turnout I thought it was going to be. In the sense that, like, usually when Cheryl does stuff, like, as Cheryl says, like, oh yeah, and people call me Cheryl Bombshell. It's like, I expected her to throw a bigger bombshell into a lot of stuff. She didn't, because a lot of stuff didn't work out the way she wanted it to, because obviously Chad comes to the party as well. And so Veronica goes first, which immediately I'm like, dude, this is very simple. Because even it was very similar, because they were even referencing like the bottle party at the beginning of the series. You're like, right, dude, this is very similar, especially because Veronica ends up choosing Archie. And I'm like, oh, considering where Betty and Archie is, it's very coming very full circle, because Betty was into Archie, and obviously Veronica and Archie kissing and 7 minutes in heaven type of thing, like that kind of bothered her a lot. So to see it kind of come full circle, but Chad's like, no, you're my wife, you're not going to hook up with your ex, which Archie's like, yo, get your hands off her, she's my wife. It's like, exactly, show her some respect. Veronica's like, all right, we're bouncing, and Cheryl's like, no, that's not the rules, and then suing Cheryl. So that they leave. Jughead's drinking like crazy and is like, all right, I'm next. He ends up, and Tabitha's like, let's just get out of here. No, he has to pick first. Pick some keys. Oh, lo and behold, he picked my keys. Let's bounce. So I'm like, the night of debauchery didn't turn out to be what they were kind of hoping and thought it would be. Apparently Jackson, Minerva hooked up. That was interesting. Also, I love Reggie goes and he's like, all right, so whose keys are these? And it's like, oh, those are Fame's. And he's like, oh, all right. And he's like, well, I think he kissed him first. And it's like, well, won't make any promises, stud. I'm like, look, and even Kevin sitting there with his mouth open, like, wait, what just happened? Betty, references the bottle party, and lo and behold, she ends up getting Archie. And it's like, well, that's interesting. Funny how things work out like that. Then Kevin and Rick, which that was interesting too for because it's really interesting, the Kevin stuff, because Kevin's very like, I think for Kevin, he feels like he's on a very self-destructive path, because it's like, because later on Fangs talks about the fact is you were the one that suggested we do, because at first I was like, oh, you have the open relationship, but then I was like, why is Kevin sneaking around with like, you know, that Rick thing of like, no names, kind of like, you know, his past a little bit. It's like, oh, he's been doing this for the past 3 years because Fang was on the road. But I think Kevin's now realizing, he's like, right, it's kind of messed up. He's like, I'm emotionally messed up, that like, there's a part of it, because he was like, I kind of wanted Fang to bring someone here to see if he would, because I think on some level Kevin's a little self-destructive in his relationship, because he ends up kind of telling Fang about it, like, I think I made a mistake with this. Like, he's like, no, we're having a baby together. What about Toni? You know, we're getting married. Like, you pushed for this. You wanted to get married. You wanted to have the family. You wanted, you know, you're the one that asked for the open relationship for the past 3 years. And I think it's just for Kevin, it's like he's not 100% what he knows what he wants, and it's just like, obviously he doesn't mean to hurt Fang, but I think it's just that adult thing of like, you're not 100% sure what you want. Like, maybe he thought like doing all these things, or like the traditional thing of like family, kids, marriage, settling down, he thought maybe it fills some void inside of him, and it didn't. And I think he feels like, I don't, you know, because especially talking to Rick, where Rick was like, oh yeah, like, you know, Fang's actually a really good guy and stuff like that. But it's like, oh, when you guys were together, did you ever talk about me? It's like, no, but considering the context and stuff, like, it's like, because like, I think the way I was interpreting it, it almost seemed like Kevin was looking for an out. And the fact is, for him, it's like, that's the thing. Like, I'm kind of like murking up our relationship until he doesn't know what he wants at the end of the day. So that's going to be interesting to see where things kind of go on that front. Cheryl, you know, it's like, oh yeah, look, oh, lo and behold, I knew fate would work our way, Toni, and Tony's like, no, it's not fate. You're the master manipulator. But it's like, oh, like, look in this room. It's like, oh, you could have, you know, it's like a baby's room, and it's like, hey, like, you know, we could do this with or without Fang. And obviously for Toni, it's like, what? She's like, basically, I spent so much time locked away with you in Thistle House. Like, I'm not going to do the same thing here on Thornhill. Like, you know, I'm not going to have my baby ear, which it was so sad, because you could tell like Cheryl's coming from the place of like, you know, we could try this again. But for Toni, it's like, you know, I'm sorry if I misled you. We can't even be friends. You know, it's like, I'm not going to be in this house of horrors and stuff like that. It's like, it is messed up though. It's like, you did drag her out. You could have left her alone, but there was some part of you, I don't know whether she, because of their past, wanted to, you know, save Cheryl from herself or what, but it was just, it was very, yeah, she kind of felt bad for Cheryl in that case. But it is the thing of, once again, Cheryl wanting what she wants and going about very manipulative ways to get what she wants. And it's also just like, well, you're trying to like lock me away in here with you still, like you're trying to cut me off from the rest of the world in my life. It's like, she's like, I kind of see what you're doing, because like, you know, because it's almost like she was also saying like, yeah, I just want to show you how fragile unions can be, like whether things kind of work out. Like, that is the sad thing. It's like, yes, it's kind of implode everyone else's life, because once again, all these other people were able to kind of move forward and have their lives. And like I said, Cheryl's stuck in time. But it's more so than anything, it's the whole Kevin and Fang thing, and I think that really grinds her gears. So, but we do see her and Minerva, like I said, where that would necessarily, Cheryl and Minerva go, whether it's like a thing of like, oh, let's get together. But because she's like, because obviously for Cheryl, she's like, no, I'm repulsive. It's like, Cheryl doesn't have a very good, like, yes, she puts on airs about like how like she seems like she's very like self-absorbed and narcissistic. And I think you can make those arguments, but it's like, I think it's also like she's very self-destructive, and she has a lot of resentment towards herself. I think honestly, Cheryl's she's a lot more insecure than, I mean, maybe you make the argument that's why she like is always so big and ballsy. It's because it's overcompensating. The fact is, she doesn't feel good about herself. She doesn't like herself at all, and that's the saddest thing. Once again, I don't think Cheryl's ever going to be quite the same. Like, after losing her brother, like, she's just never been the same. I don't think she ever will be. I think that broke something inside of her that, you know, she hasn't really worked towards fixing, you know? So to be fair, it's not just her family in general broke her. Like, who knows who she could have been and would have been if it wasn't for the very effed up and toxic family that she has, you know? So, But we'll see whether or not this Minerva thing ends up being good for her. And maybe it's a nice fresh start. I mean, that's also an element to this too, is like leave the past in the past, because Veronica is talking with Chad. She's like, she's known for a while now. And it's just like, it says it later on, is like, we're getting divorced. Betty and Archie admits like, wherever we stand, Betty, I need to let you know, like, because it's like, yeah, like, rather than us, we have a free pass to do whatever because of this whole key party thing, and we're not doing anything. And Jughead's like, I mean, not Jughead, but Archie's like, yeah, but I need to let you know ahead of time. Like, yeah, he's kind of enjoyed what they've had recently, but he still, on some level, has feelings for Veronica. He's like, and I shouldn't. And she's like, you shouldn't, like, in a sense of like, you shouldn't look at this as a thing of like, oh, you shouldn't have feelings for Veronica. It's okay to have feelings for Veronica. For her, it's like, honestly, like, what they've had has been nice. It's been a nice escape, but that's not, with what's coming up with Polly, with her mom and everything. It's like, I need to be prepared. And like that darkness, I don't want my darkness to be there and consume the light that you are. And he's like, so what you going to do, handle this alone? She's like, no, not alone. I still want you by my side, but as a friend. I still want you to be that light in the darkness for me. And it's like, if that, whatever you need me to be, Betty. And I think, for one, for him to be open about like how he feels, because obviously it's like where they were 7 years ago. I think Archie, Betty were both confused on what they really wanted, and I think this is interesting. I even thought it was interesting that Kevin was like, "Wait, don't tell me you and Jughead are getting back together." Almost like that would be a bad thing, which makes me wonder at the end of the day, are they? I don't think they are, because it seemed like they're setting up the Jughead and Tabitha thing, but we never know how that could just be like it could be very similar to the whole him and Toni thing. Like him and Toni hooked up, but then they just became friends. So it could easily be something very similar to that. But I think, which is ironic, because obviously that led to some complications later on, after the whole him and Toni thing, which obviously they're back to that, because it's like, right, you wrote about me, Fangs, and Sweet Bee, the serpents and stuff like that. You wrote about us in your book, so they're not necessarily the best of terms, I think, maybe like they would have been in the past, but still, interesting how that kind of came full circle as well. But, what I thought was interesting too is like, I mean, I think that also represents like, right, we're not high schoolers, we're actual adults, so they handled it, and it's complicated things of like, he's like, even before that, he's like, Archie's like, honestly, Betty, Veronica, I gotta be honest with you about the whole me and Betty thing. It's like, even before the key party, like, we didn't do anything, but we had hooked up beforehand. For her, it's like, the past is the past, like, you two lost souls, and lonely lost souls, and it's like, we're just friends. I mean, and that's the truth, which it is, like, they're, so it's like, because even Betty had said it herself, it's like, despite us working together, like, you're the, you're the all-American boy, I'm the girl next door. Like, on paper, we should work, but at our core, we're just very different people. Like, that, the personas that they have, that's not who they are. Like, considering everything that they've been through, everything Archie's been through, everything Betty's been through and discovered about her family and everything, it's changed who they are. They're not the same people that, it's like, oh, when they were kids that were really into each other, like, who they were when they were into each other at the beginning of the series, like, they're not those kids anymore. They're not those people anymore. They've changed a lot at their very core. So, but you also had like Archie letting Veronica know, like, whether it's with him or not, like, at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, it bothered him, it hurt him to see her married, but more so than anything, what hurt him the most was seeing Veronica unhappy. And it's like, at the end of the day, whatever it is, I just want you to be happy, Veronica. And for her, I think being with Archie helps that. It's like, the past is in the past. Let's focus on the now and, where things could potentially go from there. So I wasn't actually expecting that. I thought that was interesting that flame rekindled. Now, like I said, whether or not that happens with Jughead and Betty is going to be a whole other story. But Jughead and Tabitha, like, obviously it's like, okay, like, do you think I really saw an alien and was abducted or whatever? And she's like, I don't know. But these blackouts, you need to talk to a therapist about this. And it's just like, she's kind of looking after Jughead like that. So I thought that was kind of an interesting development on that front. So we'll see where that goes. But then finally, there's the other angle to this episode, is the whole Polly thing. She had called Alice, and it's just like, at first, Betty's wondering whether or not, like, her mom's just acting like, whoa, like, are you sure everything's okay? Like, are you sure you didn't just imagine Polly calling? It's like, no, I heard her. I know my daughter's voice. Because for Betty, it's like, typically under circumstances when someone's missing, as long as Polly has been, 2 weeks, usually after the first 2 days, it's kind of, I think it's kind of that first 48 hours type of thing. But, later on, Polly calls again and Betty's there, and it's like, all right, call my cell phone. Me and Mom are on our way, but by the time they go to the payphone, it's crushed. There's blood everywhere. I'm assuming the truck driver, because we are aware that whoever's behind this is a truck driver, which I'm wondering, like, well, since they brought Rick into the story, and considering that's kind of like Fang's department of things, like him being a truck driver and everything, and makes you wonder, is there going to be any correlation with Rick, whether he was going to be the one responsible for all this or not? But that leaves many questions, like, because obviously Betty was worried that, like, things with Polly would kind of take a dark turn, so she was trying to be there for her mom, and it's like, that's what she was kind of talking to Archie about. So I'm curious what ends up happening, like, whether that is what it is, like, is that all Polly's blood, that's someone else's blood, like, maybe some other poor victim was there, and, Polly managed to get away. Again, I don't know. There's a lot we don't know about the circumstances. I didn't talk about it, but there was another body they found in the swamp early in the episode. Luckily, not luckily, it wasn't Polly's, but it had been there a year. So, kind of leaning into what Betty brought up last episode, we're dealing with like a serial killer. So, that's kind of been in this area for a long time, probably escalated even more in the past 7 years, potentially. Well, cause we don't know how far, because I think the farthest back is like 3 or so. It's like this killer could have gone rampant in the past 7 years or whatever, or more recent years, but it's interesting. While Betty's investigating this, still dealing with like her TBK stuff as well. So whether there's going to be any crossover in that, or maybe dealing and confronting with this situation might be either a key or setup for dealing with whatever, the TBK stuff ends up being, whether that's like an end of the season stinger, or whether that's a storyline that does come like full front, like not unless these are connected, or maybe they're just disconnected cases, but it's like, maybe it sets off a chain of events that leads Betty back to the TBK case. We'll ultimately have to wait and see where all of this ultimately ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.